ثورة وعي، شتمونا
نبذونا
هددونا
ضربونا
عذبونا
قتلونا
وخونا برضو طلعونا غدرونا غدر حرقونا حرق حبسونا جيل فصلونا خد قطعونا طد منعونا شيل كتمونا شح شتتونا برضو كانت ثورتنا قايمة نيرانا قايمة ما كان بتهدى صمدنا فيها ضحينا ليها درسنا برضو شان نحميها نشيل من فينا شان نديها شتمونا بس رفعونا هددونا بس شجعونا ضربونا بس ثبتونا حبسونا بس حررونا غدرونا بس نبهونا شتتونا بس وحدونا ثورة يا أخي ثورة وعي ثورة تاني ما بتتنسي
يا دوبي نقدر
نقول ثورتنا
ناجحة نجاحها مبهر يا دوبي نقدر
نبنيه أكتر
مبروك علينا المدنية
دولتنا يلا نبنيها يا دوبي نقدر نقول ثورتنا ناجحة نجاحها مبهر يا دوبي نقدر نبنيه أكتر مبروك علينا المدنية دولتنا يلا نبنيها
أنا بفخر بك يا بلدي ديل أولادك المشوف النار ديل العلو مكانها وتسلموا ديل ماتوا جسارة ما ردوا بالشينة ما قالوا خسارة مكانتهم عالية محروس فيهم أولاد الديل البس تقدر تثق فيهم تسين الوعي الراكب راف للسنة ثورة سلمية كيانة في الراس كتمت
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Yasser Munif, and I'm Associate Professor at Emerson College and also a member of the Alliance of MENA Socialists. And I would like to welcome everyone today attending this panel, whether you are in Sudan, Europe, or the United States. The title of the panel is No Turning Back, Which Way Forward? Vision for Economic Justice in Sudan. And we have three remarkable speakers, Shadia Abdel Mun'im, Mohamed Salah, Abdurrahman, and Rabab al-Naim, who are joining us from Sudan, Germany, and the US, and I will introduce them shortly. But before I do so, let me say a few words. The Sudanese revolution is reviving the revolutionary spirit in the region and beyond. After an initial period of hope following the revolts and uprising in Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, Yemen, Syria, Bahrain, Algeria, Morocco, but also in sub-Saharan Africa in countries such as Burkina Faso, Senegal, and obviously Sudan, Authoritarian regime in many of these countries crushed grassroots movement and imposed reactionary alliances between the ruling classes and segments of the popular classes. And the Sudanese revolution, through a powerful social movement from below, is showing that other alternatives are possible. The most revolutionary groups in Sudan are warning against concessions to the military and opposing dubious alliances proposed by the conservative class, politician class in Sudan. The revolutionary movement in Sudan is following in the footsteps of powerful intellectuals such as Frantz Fanon, Patrice Lumumba, and Thomas Sankara, and also Yahya Asantewaa before them when she led the resistance against the British in Ghana. But this is a post-independence moment with new challenges and different context. And today's panel will discuss some of these challenges that the Sudanese revolution is facing, such as grassroots politics from below, the central role Sudanese women are playing in the revolt, and most importantly, which way forward for the Sudanese revolution. This panel is organized by the Alliance of MENA Socialists and sponsored by Sudan Uprising Germany, Internationalism from Below, the Tempest Magazine, and finally, the Global Prison Abolition Coalition. And before I introduce the panelists, my colleague and comrade, Sarah Abbas, who is also a member of the MENA Socialists, will say a few words about the event today.
Thank you so much, Yasser. Marhab bekum. Welcome to everyone. I'm very excited to be here. There's a bit of an echo, right? Is there a bit of an echo? Okay. Let me see if I can. I'm very happy to join you here today. As Yasser mentioned, I am a member of the Alliance for MENA Socialists, as well as of Sudan Uprising Germany. I wanted to just give a very brief introduction of what actually led to the idea for this panel and a little bit of context for those who have not been following Sudan closely. Since October 25th of this year, the Sudanese revolution, which brought down the regime of Omar Hassan al-Bashir in 2019, has been living what can only be described as a rebirth. The catalyst has been the coup d'etat of October 25th, in which the military tried once more to take control of the state. I mean, the Sudanese military is, of course, the best at coup d'etats. We've had many of them since Sudan gained its independence in 1956, and actually for most of that time between 1956 and today, the Sudanese people have been ruled by military regimes. The powerful social movements that made the December Revolution, as we call it in Sudan, were ready to confront the coup, and resistance to it, from strikes to marches of millions to barricade building and other acts of civil disobedience, has been fierce. The second wave of the uprising has been led so far by the neighborhood resistance committees, which are the grassroots bodies that played a very important role in 2019 by mobilizing and organizing communities across the country. These committees have only really gotten stronger in the last 2 years of what is known by the international community as transition, following a power-sharing deal in 2019 between the political opposition parties and the military. When the military attempted to seize full control of the state in October, as many of the revolutionaries had feared when this deal was signed, the resistance committees emerged as leaders. So they have been driving opinion and organizing efforts, but they're not alone. There are many other revolutionary factions and bodies that are also playing a key role in this revolution. So the committees have raised essentially a very clear slogan, which says that there is no to negotiation, no to compromise, and no to partnership. And this is really a break from the political settlement that has been made over the last 2 years, right? Which has not so far managed to address any of the demands of the revolution in any depth, whether it be justice for all the lives that were lost, and justice for the wars, the genocidal war in Darfur, or justice for the protesters that have been killed. Meanwhile, the civilian prime minister, since this coup, has entered negotiations with the military and is hoping essentially to return to a pre-coup status quo that is widely rejected in Sudan. We decided to organize this because we feel that what has often been missing outside Sudan about discussions of this moment and its revolutionary potential is the economic realities in which it's embedded. And Sudan is one of the richest countries on the African continent in terms of natural resources, from whether it's be land to gold to minerals. And this, of course, its economy is very much built on a colonial economy that was based on extraction from the colonies and the export of resources to the colonial metropoles. In our case, it was mostly the United Kingdom or Great Britain. And Sudan today, because of the post-colonial governments, whether military or civilian, have continued much of this approach of extraction. Today, the country ranks as one of the poorest countries in the world. It's actually ranked quite low when it comes to what are called human development indexes, whether it has to do with health or education or income per capita, and it has one of the highest levels of corruption. So just this year, during the period of so-called transition, inflation reached more than 300%, right? So this has also vastly eroded people's capacities to have their basic needs met and to live a life of dignity. The effects of climate disaster can also be seen clear in the country. And I will not talk here also about the mining sector and the gold sector, because one of our guests actually is an expert and an activist on this. But just to give a very small statistic, 70 to 80% of the country's gold is smuggled out, actually. So this is something that obviously is a huge issue, and some of the communities in which these mines are embedded are some of the poorest communities in the country. I want to basically say that in this moment of great hope, we felt it would be very interesting to look at not just what is rejected by the revolutionary movement in Sudan now, but whether a vision, specifically a vision of social justice and economic justice, is emerging. And as Yasser mentioned in this discussion, we're joined by these three incredible activists, people that I personally admire very much, who have long battled in Sudan to make it possible to achieve the revolution slogan of peace, freedom, peace, and justice. Thank you, Yasser.
Thank you, Sarah. This was very useful. Thank you. So I will introduce our three remarkable speakers, starting with Mohamed Salah Abdulrahman, who is a researcher and activist from Sudan, who is affiliated to the Gathering on Demand of Demand-Based Organizations. He's a graduate of chemistry from the University of Khartoum and has published the book, The Price of Gold, which sheds light on the human and environmental cost of mining in communities affected by gold mining in Sudan. And Mohamed Salah is joining us from Sudan, where there is electricity outage, and is joining us through his phone. So hopefully the sound will be okay. And so I will ask the questions in Arabic, and Sarah will translate the questions in English, and Mohamed Salah will speak in Arabic and will be translated into English. مرحبا، كيف الحال؟
يا مرحب، شكرا جزيلا لك مستر ياسر. شكرا لكل يعني الناس الجزء من الالاينس في مينا سوشياليست وكل المستمعين والمتابعين.
شكرا.
أنا سعيد جدا أكون معكم.
شكرا لك، والصوت عظيم، يعني ممتاز، ممكن نسمعك بوضوح. Do we want to also include Sarah for Sarah to be able to translate?
Try to translate as Mohamed and Yasser have this conversation. I will try to at least give a summary of what Mohamed is saying. So if possible, yeah, we would break as Mohamed is speaking to translate. Mohamed, Yasser said welcome to Mohamed, and Mohamed has said thank you to Yasser and to everyone who's been involved with the Alliance and with the other groups in organizing this event.
فباختصار ما هو تأثير 30 عام عن حكم البشير على الريف وسبل العيش الريفية في السودان كأول سؤال.
So the first question, just for the audience, is briefly, what has been the impact of the 30 years of the al-Bashir regime on rural areas and rural livelihoods in Sudan?
شكرا على السؤال. حقيقة هو يعني ممكن يتكلم عن الفترة بتاعت البشير، لكن يعني ممكن يتكلم عنها بفكرة أوسع باعتبار إنه السياسات اللي اتبعها البشير، اللي هي البشير فكك الدولة، اتدهور القطاع بتاع الخدمات، اتدهورت القطاعات الإنتاجية بصورة كبيرة جدا وسط التوسع بتاع الزراعة الآلية للشركات والمستثمرين المحليين والأجانب. وكلها كان عندها علاقة بالحكم.
خليني بس أترجم الحتة دي. Mohamed is saying that we can talk about the al-Bashir regime, but more widely we need to talk about the policies of the al-Bashir regime. And what al-Bashir did in that period was that he broke up really the state. He destroyed much of the service sector, and he also basically attacked and broke up the productive sectors, for example, in the agricultural field. تفضل يا محمد.
اتواصلت نفس السياسات اللي هي في السودان، هي يعني البشير واصل فيها سياسات بتاعت الاستعمار، اتواصلت بأشكال مختلفة في فترة البشير، لكن البشير الحصار الدولي الكبير أضعفه زيادة وخلاه هو يعني هجومه على الموارد وهجومه على الريف يعني أكبر وحاد أكثر، ودخل لأنه أغلب الناس اللي في المواقع بتاعت الإنتاج الصغير في الريف فقدوا فرص عملهم، زاد الاتجاه للتجيش والعسكرة خصوصا في المناطق بتاعت النزاعات، وفقدوا أراضيهم بالسياسات بتاعت الحكومة والقوانين، واتكسرت أشكال الإنتاج الصغير والتعاوني، واتكسرت المشاريع الزراعية في السودان، وده أفقر الريف بصورة كبيرة جدا جدا، وزاد من المعدلات بتاعت الهجرات.
Okay. So al-Bashir basically continued the colonial politics, but the economic embargo in which the Bashir regime faced actually had the effect of making his attack on the rural areas and the resources, the areas with resources in the country, much more aggressive and much more intense. So what he did is used a lot of those resources that were then diverted into the militarization of the state, has basically taken apart the small productive sectors in the rural areas and broke up the agricultural projects, which many people depended on. This has led to a great deal of impoverization, of poverty in the rural areas, and also to criminality in general.
وده ظهر بعدها في يعني الحقبة بتاعت البترول بتسمى في السودان من العام 99 بدأ إنتاج البترول، وعشان يتم إنتاج البترول يعني في ولايتين بس في جنوب السودان النازحين كان عددهم أكثر من 1,300,000 مواطن سوداني عشان تتم العمليات بتاعت التنقيب بتاعت البترول. استعملوا فيها الطائرات، الحروبات المحلية وغيرها، ونفس السياسة دي اللي هي الاعتماد على الإنتاج الواحد زي ما كان سابقا القطن، محتاجاه الشركات البريطانية، بعدها كان البترول عشان النظام يحافظ على نفسه. بعد 2011 انفصال جنوب السودان كان 90% من النقد الأجنبي بيجيبوا من البترول. نفس السياسة واصلت في التعدين، وبالتحديد الحصول على الذهب. واصل في نفس السياسة بتاعت الاعتماد على الذهب كمصدر أساسي للنقد الأجنبي ولكسب الولاء السياسي.
So after basically the Bashir regime got into the oil sector around 1999 and started to produce oil in 2 states in southern Sudan. At the time it was southern Sudan. This was before the split. So essentially it was 1,300,000 people were displaced from those 2 states in order to produce oil, and they were forcibly displaced through the use of military planes and so forth to drive them off the land in order to be able to produce oil. The regime also continued the policy of focusing on a single resource. So prior it was cotton, which was the inheritance of the colonial state. And then after 1999, the shift went to oil. But since 90% of the oil came from South Sudan, after the split of South Sudan in 2011, the oil went mostly with it. And the regime shifted to a reliance on mining, specifically a reliance on gold mining as a way of earning foreign currency.
الاختلاف الأساسي إنه التعدين بتاع الذهب هو بيعتمد بصورة أساسية على القطاع التقليدي أو القطاع الأهلي، وجاء في بيئة ما فيها خدمات وما فيها أشكال بتاعت إنتاج صغير، وتم تدمير الريف بصورة شبه كاملة، غير الأثر بتاع الحروب في يعني كل المناطق، يعني ممتدة في 7 ولايات من 18 ولاية. دخل لأنه يعني في بيئة بتسمح أو بتدفع آلاف وملايين المواطنين لأنهم يشتغلوا في قطاع الذهب، قطاع التعدين والحصول على الذهب، وده اللي هو ساعد في زيادة التكسير بتاع حتى بقية القطاعات، وتحول الدولة تماما للقطاع بتاع الذهب، تحول كل الريف أو بنسبة كبيرة الريف للحصول على الذهب.
Okay. So the main difference is that the gold mining relies mostly on the traditional sectors, traditional production, but it started, or it came into a place where there wasn't really a supportive environment to be able to do that. It wasn't equipped. And so it has been done in a way that has led to a very deep destruction of the rural areas. So in gold mining in 7 states in Sudan, it has also, like, the state moved completely towards supporting this, and people have not been, many thousands of people have switched to gold mining.
يعني اللي هي بس أرقام إضافية كنهاية يعني حوالي 5 مليون مواطن سوداني هم شغالين في التعدين والأنشطة المصاحبة له، حوالي 1 مليون اللي هم 13% من سكان السودان، اللي هو بقى أكبر قطاع فيه قوة عاملة في البلد. والمرتبطين بالسلطة إذا كان في زمن البشير بيستفيدوا من المخلفات بتاعت التعدين على أساس إنه يعيدوا إنتاج الذهب ويقوموا بتهريبه من السودان بالاستفادة من علاقاتهم بجهاز الدولة وعلاقاتهم الإقليمية والدولية. فده هو حول الدولة تماما، عمل تحول نوعي في الدولة.
So just to give a sense of the numbers, when we talk about gold mining, about 5 million people in Sudan work in the gold mining sector or in related jobs. This has made this is about 13% of the population, and it has therefore become the biggest kind of productive sector in the country. The regime has benefited from the sector by using its relationships both within the country as well as outside the country to be able to smuggle the gold.
شكرا لك. أنت طبعا شخصيا مهتم بشكل خاص بمسألة تعدين الذهب وكتبت كتاب عن الموضوع. عندما حصل جنوب السودان على استقلاله عام 2011 أخذ معه معظم قطاع النفط. تحول نظام البشير إلى تعدين الذهب وتصديره مما منحه فرصة جديدة للحياة. يصنف السودان كثالث أكبر مصدر للذهب في أفريقيا وواحد من 10 الأوائل على مستوى العالم، ومع ذلك يتم تهريب معظم هذا الذهب. وقدر ما أعلم لم يتغير هذا حقا منذ ثورة 2018. أين يتم تعدين الذهب في السودان؟ وهل يمكن أن تعطينا فكرة عن هذا القطاع؟
So we're just asking what that Mohamed Salah personally has been especially interested, as is clear from his last answer in the question of gold mining. So when South Sudan, as he mentioned, became independent in 2011, it took most of the oil sector with it. The al-Bashir regime then turned to gold mining and the export of gold mining, which gave it basically a new lease of life economically. Sudan is listed as the third biggest exporter of gold in Africa and one of the top 10 worldwide. And yet most of this gold is smuggled out, as far as we know. And this has not really changed since the 2018 uprising or revolution. So where is the gold mining taking place in Sudan? And can you tell us a little bit more than you already have about this sector?
يعني نفس انه لما نتكلم عن السياسه بتاعت البشير لازم نعاين لانه هو بينفذ في سياسات قبله لكن بتغييرات نوعيه حصلت في النظام بتاع البشير ذاته والتركيب بتاعته واللاعبين الاساسيين خصوصا في الجانب الاقتصادي. نفس الحاجه نتكلم عن انه الثوره اللي حصلت في السودان الحكومه جاءت ما بعد الثوره استمرت في نفس السياسات بتاعت البشير وبطريقه أسوأ منها، وده بيكون واضح جدا في قطاع التعدين. وحصل تغيير من قيادات البشير للقيادات العسكريه بصوره واضحه، يعني بقت هي المسيطره بصوره كامله على تعدين الذهب. يعني انا حقول مثال مثلا واحد
دقيقة بس قبل ما تقول يا محمد خلينا ترجم الجزء ده. So Mohamed said this is the same thing when we speak about the al-Bashir regime. It's important to note that he continued the same policies but with some substantive differences. So the same policies as before, but with some substantive differences. The government that came after the revolution continued also the policies of the al-Bashir regime, but actually in a worst way when it comes to the mining sector. So what we can say is that the leadership or the control has shifted from the leadership of the al-Bashir regime to the leaderships within the military.
يعني نموذج مثلا للسياسات او نفس الهيكل بتاع التعدين، نفس القوه الفاعله بس اضيف لها المجموعات العسكريه، نفس العلاقه بتاعت المواطنين مع جهاز الدوله اللي هو جهاز عنيف بيسعى للحفاظ على مصالح الشركات على حساب المواطنين واشكال انتاجهم والصغيره. البشير لما سقط السودان كان في تصنيفه ده هو بيصدر في متوسط 100 طن في السنة. العام السابق يعني عام 2020 السودان صدر 14 طن من الذهب، واللي هو ده ما معناه ما لأنه الإنتاج بتاع التعدين نقص، لأنه في هيمنة كاملة عسكرية على القطاع بتاع التعدين، وبقت بتتم العملية هي ما عملية بتاع التهريب، ممكن نسميها عملية بتاعت فساد منظم. وبقى بتنشأ الدولة الموازية برعاية، يعني الدولة ذاتها هي بترعى بناء الدولة الموازية والاقتصاد الموازي واللي هو الاقتصاد المرتبط بالأجهزة العسكرية.
So to give an example again regarding the policies of mining, basically it's the same framework with the same relationship between the people and the state. And the state's relationship is extremely violent and it's an extractive relationship that is extremely violent. To give an example of the changes that have been happening during the al-Bashir period, of gold export, 100 tons were produced of gold in the year, were exported of gold in the year. However, now it's 14 tons of gold in this period since the revolution. But this is not because the amount of gold that is being produced has decreased, but because the state is become very efficient at basically setting up a framework of extraction of systematic corruption, where the state actually nurtures the development of a parallel economy that it can benefit from.
شكرا. أنت طبعا ناشط مع مجموعة تسمى بتجمع الأجسام المطلبية. كثير من اليساريين خارج السودان سمعوا عن لجان المقاومة السودانية لكنهم لا يعرفون شيئا أو الكثير عن هذا التجمع. هل يمكنك إخبارنا عنه من فضلك؟
So you're one of a few activists who did research on the human and environmental impact of gold mining on local communities in Sudan, and you're also one of the few who you're also a member of the gathering, affiliated with the Gathering of Demand-Based Groups, an organization called the Gathering of Demand-Based Groups. Many people in the left outside Sudan have heard about the resistance committees by now, but they don't know about this gathering. Can you tell us about it?
طيب السياسات دي هي ما كانت يعني سياسات بتاعت الإنقاذ، هي كل ما هي بتستمر بتزيد التوحش بتاعها. كان في مقاومة قاعد تنشأ في الريف السوداني وفي كل المناطق، يعني في الريف والمدن، مبنية على أساس القضايا. لجان المقاومة هي مبنية على أساس الجغرافيا، اللي هي المناطق على أساس الجغرافيا، التوزيع الجغرافي للناس يتوزعوا ويتشكلوا في لجان المقاومة، وقامت بدور عظيم جدا جدا من 2013. الأجسام المطلبية هي يعني بناء على أساس القضايا، وهي ما قبل الثورة. أغلب الأجسام هي أساس ما قبل الثورة. مثلا الأجسام الاتحادات المزارعة.
خليني بس أترجم الجزء ده. So the policies of the al-Bashir regime, or the Inqaz regime as it's known in Sudan, the more violent that they became, the more resistance developed against the regime in the rural areas as well. So the resistance committees developed based on geographic location and played a very important and wonderful and great role actually since 2013. The gathering of demand, or the demand-based organizations, by contrast, are older than that and existed in the rural areas from before.
طيب التشكيل بتاع الأجسام المطلبية هم في آخر مؤتمر الأجسام المطلبية كانوا 67 جسم. الأجسام دي بما فيها المتأثرين من السياسات الزراعية، خصوصا في المشاريع الزراعية. وده السودان عنده ممكن يكون أعرق حركة بتاعة مقاومة وسط المزارعين، اللي هو يتأسس فيها الاتحاد بتاع مزارعين الجزيرة والمناقل. وجزء من الأجسام المطلبية تحالف مزارعين الجزيرة والمناقل. جزء منها المتأثرين من الرعاة يعني شغالين في القطاع بتاع الثروة الحيوانية، خصوصا في المناطق تحت السابنة. المتأثرين بالقضايا المتعلقة بالبيئة والنشاط الاستخلاصي، اللي هم المتأثرين تحديدا بالأنشطة بتاعت التعدين بتاع الذهب والأنشطة بتاعت الاستخلاص بتاع النفط. المتأثرين من الحروب، اللجان بتاعت النازحين، المتأثرين من السدود، وقيمة سدود كبيرة كثيرة. الإنقاذ أكثر فترة وقيمت فيها سدود كبيرة في السودان، ويتضرروا منها مئات الآلاف من البشر. نزحوا بصورة يعني إذا كان أعيد توطينهم بصورة إجبارية، أو كانوا في حركة المقاومة لبناء السدود. يعني في 3 سدود ما اتبنت على النيل، في دال وكجبار والشريك، لأنه كان في مقاومة شعبية قوية. وديل هم وفي ناس متأثرين من بناء السدود إذا كان في مروي ولا إذا كان في الرصيرس أو في علي عطبرة وستيت. في ناس يتأثروا تأثير كبير بالنزع للأراضي، نزع الأراضي إذا كان في المدن أو المناطق في الريف السوداني. ده هو التكوين بتاع الأجسام المطلبية. يعني أنا قلت أمثلة وغيرها من المجموعات، مثلا المجموعات المتأثرة بالنزاع في الحدود في المناطق بتاعت أبييه أو المناطق بتاعت الفشقة أو المناطق المتأثرين بالقضايا المتعلقة بحقوق الإنسان زي الشهداء بتاعين بورسودان، المجزرة اللي تمت في بورسودان. فده مبني على أساس القضايا ومواقع الإنتاج، ودي أجسام هي قاعدية بدت قبل الثورة في إنها نمت عندها قناعة إنه قضاياها ما بيحصل لها حل إلا بصورة بمقاومة سياسية، والمقاومة السياسية كانت بتعني إنه لابد من إنه نزيح البشير وسياساته ونجي بنظام وطني ديمقراطي.
خلينا نترجم.
شكلت الأجسام دي في صيغة بتاع التنسيق مشتركة كلها مع بعض للتضامن والتشبيك والضغط على النظام.
Okay. So there are many groups that make up that can come under the umbrella of demand-based organizations. First of all, one of the oldest resistance groups in Sudan, actually, that goes way back, is the Union of Farmers in Jazeera and Managil. This is an area in central Sudan, and this is one of the oldest resistance forces in the country. So the farmers are part of these demand-based organizations, but there are also many other groups, many disparate groups. One of them is the groups of communities that are affected by that work in the area of livestock production and animal husbandry. Also those who are representing communities that are affected by mining. There are also groups of people that are affected by war and conflict. There are also those that that have been affected by displacement based on the dam building in Sudan, because as many of you know, Sudan has the Blue Nile, the White Nile, and the Nile and other rivers, and this government has actually done more than any before. It has worked on tried to build dams, which have led to the displacement of hundreds of thousands of people, the forcible displacement and resettlement of people, and there was always resistance to this dam building. So 3 dams, for example, were not built. The regime was not able to build them because of this resistance. You also have people that are affected by existing dams, whether in Merawi or in Atbara, that are also part of these groups. You have also groups that are affected by the land grabbing also in rural areas, and people that are also affected by displacement in the border areas. For example, in the Abyei region between North and South Sudan, you have groups that are affected that are fighting for issues to do with human rights. For example, in Port Sudan, which is the only working and the big port in Sudan that is the outlet into the Red Sea and also the Suez Canal. And these are all very grassroots based organizations that had a very strong conviction that they had to resist, to engage in political resistance of the regime, and that the removal of this regime would allow for the kinds of democratic practices that would allow them to then reclaim these areas economically for the communities.
شكرا. طبعا حضرتك تكلمت على رؤية هذا التجمع. ما هي عملية الوصول إلى رؤية موحدة إلى حد ما؟ وهل بدأت هاي استراتيجيات في الظهور من ناحية؟ وهل هناك كيانات ثورية أخرى مهمة في المناطق الريفية؟
So what is the vision of this gathering of demand-based organizations? Is there, or what is the process for reaching a more or less unified vision? Have any strategies begun to emerge? And are there any other important revolutionary entities in the rural areas?
يعني أنا حقول مثال واحد يعني عشان الزمن ممكن يكون طويل عشان نقول الأمثلة في النماذج المختلفة في القطاعات المختلفة اللي هو عنده علاقة بالعنوان بتاع اليوم اللي هو في التعدين. في التعدين أول حاجة تمت بعد تشكيل الحكومة في سبتمبر، دعت التجمع بتاع الإسلام المطلبية، هو دعا إنه يكون في مؤتمر يرتب لقيام مؤتمر يصل لسياسات بديلة في القطاع بتاع التعدين. والمؤتمر ده كان بمشاركة كل المجموعات المتأثرة بالتعدين، المجتمعات المحلية المتأثرة بالأنشطة بتاعت التعدين واللي هي يعني عانت ما عانت، والعاملين في قطاع التعدين ذاتهم المعدين الأهليين. اتجمعوا من كل المناطق في السودان وشارك برضو في المؤتمر ده، كان عندهم جلساتهم براهم وشاركوا بصورة مشتركة مع جهاز الدولة ودعوا الشركات الخاصة ذاتها لأنها هي تجي تشارك. والكلام ده تم بعد 3 شهور من تشكيل الحكومة في 2019. نهاية 2019 اطلع المؤتمر بتوصيات ورؤية بديلة كاملة لقطاع التعدين فيها الأساس للمجتمعات المحلية والعاملين المنتجين. الرؤية دي ما وجدت طريقة للتنفيذ، وبعدها وافقت عليها كل الأجهزة بتاع الدولة. جاءت أجيزت في المؤتمر الاقتصادي اللي اتعمل في 2020 كرؤية للدولة، وبعدها تاني يعني بدأت بداية تنفيذ الخطة اللي هي ممكن تنقذ الأزمة الاقتصادية كان في السودان كبديل عن السياسات بتاعت الديون والقروض. الحكومة مشت في اتجاه إنها تمشي في القروض والديون وتبقى على الوضع القائم ذاته نفسه. وصلوا لأنه طالبونا نحن في تجمع الإسلام المطلبية، إحنا وعدد من الأجسام الثانية شغالة كون تجمع للكيانات الشغالة في قطاع التعدين، المنتجين، المجتمعات المحلية، أساتذة الجامعات، المهندسين والجيولوجيين، كونوا تجمع واحد وأجازوا الرؤية اللي قدمت تجمع الإسلام المطلبية وعرضت على الوزارة بتاعت المعادن وأجيزت وقدمت لرئيس الوزراء، ورئيس الوزراء وعد في 2020 إنه وحيصدر يعني قرارات مباشرة لأنه هي الرؤية شاملة بما فيها مؤسسة الدولة البديلة. وطبعا ما طلعت أي قرارات لأنه ده توجه مختلف تماما عن التوجه أصلا مصمم على أساس السياق السياسي. نفس التجربة دي هي في تجارب ثانية في قطاعات، إذا كان المزارعين، إذا كان الرعاة، إذا كان، فهي في رؤية بديلة، لكن الرؤية البديلة هي محتاجة لسياسات كليا بديلة ودولة بديلة تعمل لمصلحة المواطنين ما لمصلحة الشركات والكارتيلات العسكرية.
Okay, so Mohamed said I will give one example from the mining sector about this question of vision. So after the power sharing government was formed in September 2019, very shortly after these groups bringing together local communities that are affected by mining, as well as the workers who work within the mining sector, the artisanal workers, they came together in a conference. And they actually developed a very clear program, a different alternative of what to do with the mining sector in such a way as to end the suffering, but also have communities reclaim this. And they invited not only the state to participate or the government to participate, but also the private sector, which is involved in mining. And so there was a very clear and very well detailed alternative program when it comes to this sector. Unfortunately, the government went in 2020 towards the direction of actually the policy of really more of the policies of dealing with the issues of loans at the international stage and more of the neoliberal direction. And again, there was a meeting where these groups came together around this vision, also with university professors and others. This program was brought forth to the government. It had a complete set of a different kind of policies, and the government adopted it, but it was never actually implemented because the direction that the government took it would require for it to be implemented a government that actually wants to change this situation and these policies that exist.
شكرا جزيلا لك. رح تحاول ترجع تتواصل معنا اذا رجعت الكهرباء. مزبوط.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. Will you be able to join us if the electricity comes back?
أكيد. شكرا جزيلا لكم.
Thank you very much.
So now we have a second remarkable speaker. Rabab Al-Nuaim is a Sudanese activist, member of the Sudanese Worker Alliance for the Restoration of Trade Unions, member of the Sudanese Worker Alliance for the Restoration of the Trade Unions, SWARTU. She's a co-founder of Ta Marbuta, a feminist podcast that discusses topics from our daily lives and their intersections with capitalism, colonialism, and other systems of oppression in an attempt to dismantle, question, and rethink the social structures and institutions that surround our struggle toward liberation. And welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So the first question is about the phrase reclaim unions, which is used in Sudan to describe a key part of the union movement in this revolutionary period. Can you explain what that means and when this effort started and what do they consist of?
Okay. So the phrase reclaim or restore unions actually is motivated by the fact that union organizations, as we know them in Sudan in the last 30 years, and generally speaking since the early 1970s, has been alienated and separated from the working class of Sudan. Has been alienated from the struggle for a better wage, for basically providing decent work conditions or decent labor. This effort is not new. Like I said, this really has to do, we can think of labor movement in Sudan before 1971 and after 1971. More or less, there is general resemblance in the situation of labor movement. After 1971, we see that there is a tendency to deviate from worker bases, to deviate from General Assembly, and to have more of like superficial bodies, whether they're general unions or general federations that are far from their general assemblies, and that they tend to centralize decision making, and as a result they don't really defend the interest of the working class. This effort started in 1980s, right before the 1985 revolution, and it was cut off by the political alliance through the Sudanese workers' trade unions, and it was re-established in one way or another in 1987 and now again in 2019. So it really has to do with the fact that union organizations in the last 30 years, and like I said, from the 1970s, have been alienated from the working class. They don't necessarily represent or speak for the issues of the working class. So hence we need to restore and reclaim unions. Can you hear me? Not sure if you can hear me.
Yeah, thank you. So what is the Sudanese Workers Alliance for the Restoration of Trade Unions, and who forms the alliance? And what other groups are important revolutionary players in the union movement in Sudan today?
Okay, so SWARTO, the Sudanese Alliance for Reclaiming and Restoration of Trade Unions, for abbreviation SWARTO, is actually an umbrella of individuals and different workers and labor movement. We have labor and union workers ranging from truck drivers to teachers to bankers, and many different union or labor body that's still under establishment and under consideration. Like I said, this is a continuing effort, but officially SWARTO has been restored or has been reactivated in end of 2018, early 2019, with the first wave of the revolution. And it works. It's part of a great labor movement within Sudan. So there's not only SWARTO, there is other organizing bodies and other umbrellas, other unions that we share strategic goals with. For example, the issue of having union organization where wage workers and employers are within this, also known as the establishment union, and which has been the status quo in the last 30 years. So there is a lot of defects, a lot of misorganizing that actually result in the dilution of the struggle for better working conditions. So SWARTO is actually part of a general trend within the Sudanese organized labor movement.
Okay, thanks very much. So when we look at the union movement in Sudan, we see that there's a class dimension, of course, as there always is in terms of worker agitation in Sudan. So I'm thinking, for example, about the strikes of the sugar workers at Kinana last year, who were going on extended strikes for better working conditions and labor conditions in general. What can you tell us about the conditions for unions in blue-collar sectors versus more white-collar sectors in Sudan?
Okay. So the class struggle is very apparent, I think, in the Sudan Revolution, first wave. If we think of the first wave as December 2018, and the second wave that we're living currently. I would also I want to also emphasize some examples. The Kinana sugar worker strike was it was an example of how the working class within Sudan is able to organize, but there is always a cutoff between organizing and actually transforming those organizing effort into tangible gain for the working class. Because the Kinana sugar factory, the strike, although it continued for almost 33 days, it ended up with a steering committee that is basically under the approval of the administration. Within the authority of the administration, within the authority of the state. And hence, again, it's alienated from the General Assembly, it's alienated from the people who actually carried the strike for 33 days, which put us in the situation that we cannot really expect change that is in the best interest of the working class, coming from such a compromise, if you will say. This is, we can think of it, and this is the general tendency for white-collar workers, not just in Sudan, generally speaking, because they're usually used to oppress and control blue-collar workers. But I would also like to highlight other examples. For example, we've seen within Khartoum state, sanitation workers carrying out strikes, demanding for better wages after the improvement in wages that, I'm not sure what's his name, the Ministry of Finance, Badawi, after the Badawi change the structure of wage earners, the sanitation workers of Khartoum state were not included. Also, they're worker by the state, worker by the government, they're employer in the government, yet the government failed to see them, failed to include them within the new structure of wages. So they carried a strike, they were successful. Also, we see in the industrial zone in Bahri, there has been a struggle to reclaim and rebuild a hospital for workers. So we do see a change in the effort after, not in the effort for organizing, but actually transforming, if I would say, from masses into organizing, into transforming it into some political or tangible change in the daily life of workers. Within that, blue-collar workers are usually just better able, like I said, because it's difficult to contain them within, like there is a very clear separation of interest. So it's difficult to dilute their struggle. It's difficult to contain them within a compromise that is the employer or the state or another authority is part of. But with that being said, it's really not going to like this separation between white collar and blue collar is not going to lead into long-term effect positively on the working class, generally speaking. And this really has to do with the fact that we need unity between blue collar and white collar workers. But the way to achieve that unity and to make sure that they have a mutual interest and that they can organize and collectively bargain around those mutual interests. That is, it's a tricky way forward. So the issue is, the thing is, how are we going to proceed forward with such unity of workers or unity of the working class within Sudan?
Thank you, Rabab. The messiness of everyday struggle and the tension and contradictions within the union movement is really very interesting. Could you talk a little bit about the reason why the law around union and unionization was not passed in the past several years, 2 years? There's been a lot of organizing and struggle around it. And so what are the reasons for not being adopted?
Okay. So before I go into that, I would like just to point that usually the conflict around the passing of the union law, I think to a large extent it has been misled. Before I talk about what I think the reason are for not passing a law, I would like to make it very clear that we don't necessarily need a law for unions to exist. Whenever there is a wage earner and there is an employer, whenever there is the condition for exploitation, the class struggle is apparent, and hence the need to organize workers. So unions are usually base their legal status from their general assemblies, from the workers that they represent and the issue that they speak of. Obviously, existing within a state and within a law frame, having a union law will help to manage the struggle between wage earners and between employers. So the absence, the alienation of workers from the first wave of the revolution. For example, if we critically think of the SPA, Sudanese Professionals Association, or even within different political parties, within FFC, the alienation of workers from the political scene in the first wave of the revolution led to the very fragile partnership, which eventually led into the coup that happened on October 25th. This same alienation resulted in a constitutional document that can never actually do any progress in the best interest of the Sudanese people. Because to begin with, the partnership and the constitutional document were put as a block in the direction of the Sudanese revolution. So the fact that there is no union law after the signing of the constitutional document in 2019 is only a logical result, because you cannot have such a fragile partnership that inherently is contracted with the best interest of the Sudanese people and actually imagine that you can get some sort of a progress. You can obviously drive the struggle forward, but the result is as we've seen. But this does not mean that labor unions or, like, generally speaking, labor movement was not present in the last 2 years. Although there is no union law, we have seen a state of unrest, continuous struggle to, like I mentioned, the sanitation workers in Khartoum state, industrial workers in Bahri, and I can go on and on. Like the last 2 years since 2019, we've seen the organized labor movement on a constant struggle, daily struggle, and this again emphasize the fact that yes, we do need a progressive labor law, but by no means the absence of it implies the absence of an organized labor movement. And unions gain their legal status not from a law, not from the state, not from any administrative authorities, but rather from the General Assembly and from actually speaking for the interest of the workers that they represent. I can't hear you. I think you're muted.
So we have one last question for now. Of course, there'll be more questions from the audience, and I want to remind the audience to post its question, and at the end we will come back to these questions. So what we want to talk about the most today is sort of what visions are emerging now. I mean, there's so much going on in Sudan now. It's such a period of growth happening now. There's so much of a desire to not only oppose what we know doesn't work, but to come up with an alternative vision that can actually deliver on these demands of the revolution. So the question is, what visions are emerging now within the union movement in Sudan? What is starting to emerge in terms of reclaiming, rebuilding, and building unions? And if I may also ask you to reflect a bit on the question of the informal sector, because most workers in Sudan are actually in the informal sector, the vast majority of them. How does that affect potentially what this vision could be or the strategy that the union movement employs?
Okay. So absolutely, this is a moment of hope for Sudan. A lot of is on the line, which means we need a lot of theoretical work along with a lot of practical work. I would summarize a vision that is emerging, and we see it within resistance committee, neighborhood resistance committee, and also within unions. It's generally speaking organizing and attaching theory to organize and practice. So a vision that should work towards building independent and democratic unions, unions that drive their legal status from their general assemblies, and unions that realize the power and the importance of both theory and practice. We don't want to fall. Instead of, I want to rephrase it this way. Instead of, we don't want, what we need is to actually advance the working class struggle forward, is to rebuild the political and the social struggle agenda in Sudan, with the working class in front of that agenda. And this is done through studying the theory and the practice of the working class in Sudan, and trying to answer important theoretical questions. For example, this question of the intersection between politics and union, or like labor movement. Mohamed Salah earlier mentioned something that is very encouraging, that demand-based group have realized that they need to engage in political struggle in order to achieve tangible change within their demands. Unions are still learning this lesson. So what we're seeing is a vision that answers these questions. And also in a greater sense, the question of what is working class in Sudan. Existing within 30 years of a neoliberal system that has some sort of an Islamic cover, kind of worked with the propaganda that there is no working class, as if a working class is just literally someone who goes to the factory, the very classic definition of working class. So all of these questions are emerging, and a vision of independency. And by independency, I mean independency from the employer, independency from the state, independence from other authority. You only answer to your General Assembly and to your mutual interest. I'm not sure if there was like a second part of the question that I missed. Can you repeat that, please, Sarah?
Yes. I mean, it was really, I mean, I think you've addressed more or less everything that I want, and we can come back to it later. I think it was just a question about this extremely challenging situation, not just in Sudan, but in many countries, actually, in Africa and the Middle East, of this, concentration of workers in the informal sectors, right? Because this poses a different kind of challenge towards the more traditional conceptions of unions, right? And we know that there have been experiments, like, for example, the attempted sort of association or union of the food and tea sellers. There are examples out there in Sudan. I think for now we will move to Shadia, but we would like to come back perhaps to this question because it's very important. But thank you so much for this, and just stay with us. So we will come back to it. Thank you very much. Rabab and Mohammed. And now I would like to introduce Shadia Abdel Munim. It's an honor to have her with us as well. She's a Sudanese feminist and political activist, a fierce defender of human rights, especially of women. Shadia is the political secretary of the Sudan Communist Party in Germany and one of the founders of a number of associations and initiatives and of resistant bodies to the al-Bashir regime throughout the 30 years of his bloody military Islamist regime in Sudan. Shadia has worked closely with a number of women's groups in conflict areas in Sudan for peace and justice. Today, after the revolution, she is struggling with groups of Sudanese activists inside Sudan and in the diaspora in order to achieve the slogans of the revolution and to establish a better reality for Sudanese women. Welcome, Shadia.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for the Socialist Alliance. Thank you for Sudan Uprising. And thank you for having Rabab and Mohamed Salah. Really, they give great hope that we are just like in the right track of the revolution.
Yes, I agree. And I want to also thank you all for being here because Rabab, Yasser, myself, and Sina, who's doing the technical work for this event, are in the US, so it's early for us. But for you and for Mohamed Salah, it's quite late. So thank you again. Shadia, I wanted to start with an article that you recently wrote, which was published in the site Open Democracy. And in that article, you argued that women's groups in Sudan were the most ready of any actor in 2018 to confront the regime. And then you also argued that this is because of the history of confrontation between the regime and women's groups over the last 30 years. Can you tell us briefly what you mean by that? I know it's 30 years and it has to be brief, but why, economically specifically, what has this confrontation looked like with the al-Bashir regime?
Yeah, actually, it is a lot to talk about that, but let me just start it from a point that Mohamed Salah said that which is happening in Sudan, like happening from the independence of Sudan. But what is changing only the faces, like the systems, the regimes, and the international interference and the regional. So, like Sudanese women was forced to confront the al-Bashir regime because they were targeted like directly from the regime in different forms. Like when you look to the struggle in Sudan, like all the people are by way or another is affected by the regime. But when you look to the women, you find them that they are affected double. For example, like which is very clear to the people, like internationally, that the freedom of being in the public sphere, like the laws which was started to be built from the 90s, like early 90s, the dress code and everything and this. But it is not only that. Behind that was economic war against women. For example, hundreds of women couldn't enter the universities without the Islamic dress. I know so many women couldn't work, or they heard from their jobs because they didn't dress in the way which the al-Bashir regime or the Islamic front in Sudan agreed. So, like, it is not only the freedom of dressing, it is the freedom of work and being in the public sphere. The women movement in Sudan, if I can say movement, because like it was led by different group, like before the 70s, or to the 80s, the biggest women organization is the Sudanese Women Union, led by Fatma Ahmed Ibrahim. But they are different also organizations which are like working in the public sphere, politically and demandly. So the women at the beginning, from the dictatorship of al-Bashir, was targeted by a series of laws which eliminate their movement in the public sphere. And this elimination affected them socially and economically. And I remember that the first, and women were brave. So that first demonstration against al-Bashir regime was when they raised the price of the sugar. So it is the price of the sugar. But because women are affected with this, and because they are organized, they led a demonstration in the 80s, early 90s. And this was very brave because the regime was very cruel and very aggressive at that time. And day by day, the regime started to target women by the series of law, for example, the public order law, the criminal law, which contain almost 5 to 6 articles, from the article from 150 to 154. It is specially targeted women. And the family law also is very, very aggressive and against women. So that women suffer directly from the regime and suffer within the Sudanese community with different policies of the regime. But what women did, as they are very organized and they all the time working together, groups with different backgrounds, but there is something very important united them. Their women issues and their economical suffer and the political sphere, so that they are working in different bodies. And every time when the regime is very oppressive, they start just to find different form of organization. And this continued 30 years. And during these 30 years, women developed their methods of resistance, could unite on their targets, and they choose their battles very wisely, and they win it. They beat the regime many times, and they put the regime in a very critical situation. I remember in the 2000, women, al-Bashir regime set a law that forbid women from working only in hospitals and schools. So women united at that time and resist this law by different forms. But what is very interesting and very sound, that they went to the constitutional law at that time, which just puts the regime in a very critical situation. And they didn't do that only, but also they surrounded with the international women movement at that time, and so many embassies called the regime, and it was an issue. So that women are wise when they choose their battles and they do their resistance. Through the 30 years, women had great experience in resisting and in working together as women. So that when the revolution starts, they were very organized, and they can find each other, they can support each other, and there is a huge number and different forms of women organization, like Not Women Operation Group, which is started to be organized at 2009. Before that, there is so many groups like Nuwaida, Asma, so many organizations. So that women are organized. When the revolution started, just they didn't like start to collect themselves from different areas, but they know who is with them in the same track, and they can resist, and also they gain experiences through demonstrations, because women demonstrations in Sudan started like from the early 90s and was oppressed, and then started like scattered like from that time until to the year 2000, they started to work together. And even they are very diverse from different political background, from difficult social and economical background, so that like they were organized. When the revolution started, they were organized. There is so many women organizations. They can network with each other, and this is the thing that their contribution in the revolution is very sound. There are many women organization groups, organized group, and they have the experiences, like how I remember in the revolution in December 2019, the first group who raised written slogan of the revolution was a group of women in Undurman. So like they could from their experiences they could network with each other. That is.
Thank you very much. Very interesting and informative discussion about women and their role on the ground. So could you tell us a little bit about Sudanese women, especially racialized women from the region like Nuba Mountains and Darfur? They are highly exploited in the economic system of the country, and they are largely locked out of the land ownership and have very high illiteracy rates. And they are usually not addressed by the prominent and larger unions, given virtually no labor rights. They're not in the conventional labor groups, and constitute the majority, along with children, of the war displaced and workers in the informal sector. Is there a vision emerging of how the economy can end the exploitation of these women? And also, if you could address the historical injustice and that empower them. Are groups led by these women making this vision themselves, or is it other actors, maybe international NGOs or outside player? And what is the vision, if any? Is there a strategy beginning to become clear in those regions?
Well, as I said, women are the highly affected by the third year of the dictatorship of al-Bashir, and it is clear that they like for a reason or another, they are the group who is very vulnerable because of the highly percentage of women who are displaced because of the war in the city areas, Nuba Mountain, Blue Nile, and Darfur. And for the long time of war, even the women from South Sudan were displaced to Khartoum, and they are living in the marginalized areas of Greater Khartoum. So those groups are living really in the margin of the life, not only of Khartoum, but of the life itself. They are suffering very difficult economical situation. They forced to work like in informal sector, like selling tea and food in the streets, which were also targeted by the regime, by the public order law. And this is a very sad story, but women also try to organize themselves within that, trying just like to work collectively together, so that from even before the war started in Darfur, the drought in Darfur forced families, and especially women and with children, to displace to the big towns, so that they started to be a very big community of displaced women in the margins of the big towns, and they are, by their needs and their circumstance, like they needed to work together, to collaborate together. This led them to make very small associations, like associations of a group of women who are selling tea and food in the street. I remember that there is women who are living in Khartoum and working this business also, help the others to form their associations. But going back to women who are living in Darfur, Nuba Mountain, Blue Nile, and the areas of conflict, they were isolated from the regime. Like, it was very difficult at that time just to reach them, to make any kind of collaboration, work with them. It is difficult to travel to Darfur at that time. Like, I remember I was working in an organization, and we need really permission from the security forces to travel just to make our job, like our normal job, our routine job. But which I noted that they are working together. They are formed in different kind of associations. They are trying just like to tackle their economical situations, their small businesses together. They are even who are working in the markets there. They are just like try to make kind of associations together. And this this point really is I can say it's the first notes or first points which helps women to be organized. Women as a marginalized area and the conflict areas are suffer from different difficulties, like they couldn't get the privilege to go to schools. The female child are from early age, they can't go to school. They are in a very hard area of war. So like there is a historical marginalizations happens to those groups. For me, I think that like when we talk about vision, it is a very big concept to their situation at that time, and even after the revolution, because like when we talk about peace, Juba peace agreement, and so it is not affecting those areas. Like still there is no peace there. They are attacked every so and then by military groups. So like they couldn't have the peace or the privilege just to sit together and have a vision. But the different organization which is working at these areas and even is working in Khartoum and big towns, like trying to work with these groups, which for me is important to mention that like the priorities of the organizations or even of different women are not the same. So when we speak about like illiteracy, I have one example from the Blue Nile. We have an literacy class, and the class started with 25 women. And when we went to make evaluation, the class ended up with 2 women. When we try to understand the reasons, we find that the women are go early in the morning to bring water from the side of the river, Blue Nile, and they get back in the evening, actually, with only a little amount of water. So, like, when we ask them, we find only those 2 women who can go to the class, the daughter and the wife of the leader of the tribe or the village. And because there is someone who brings the water for them, so that they don't need to go for water. But the other women, they need to go for drinking water. And I asked one of them, like, I noticed that she just go to the water early in the morning when we start our route. And when we finish in the evening, we are going back, I find her in her way. I asked her how it comes that all the day you are bringing water. She tell me that you don't know how we are collecting water. And she just like telling me that she just like collect the water. Really, they are collect the water and put them in a very big container, like a bigger container up to the jerrycan, which they can take in their shoulders. So when we speak about illiteracy, we just remember the words of Mohamed Salah, that we haven't system, we haven't regime, we haven't state. So like every these elements works together. There is no system. So when we speak about economical effect to women, just we have to take into consideration the policies and the politics. And this is what is happening. Like, if I forget about the 30 years after the revolution, nothing happened in a very important parts of this which affect the whole Sudanese people, especially women. For example, nothing happened in the economical sector. It get worse. There is no state system, like there is no system at all. So like there is no constitutions, there is no laws, there is no how I can say it, there is no how I can say it, I can forget the word. Sarah, a little help. Are you there? Sarah, the voice.
I'm listening.
Yeah. جست انا عايزه اقول انه يعني هو ما في سيستم اصلا، ما عملت حاجه في قطاع التشريعات. يعني الجهاز التشريعي، يعني ما في محكمه دستوريه، ما في قوانين، وما في شغل يتعمل في يعني اي فيجن اقتصاديه تتقدم محتاجه لتشريعات ولسياسات. المسألة دي ما في. يعني نحن مثلا لما قعدنا مع
دقيقة خليني بس أترجم ثانية واحدة. Shadia is saying that there isn't a legislative system at all to support any of these changes. There isn't a constitutional court, there isn't a legislative assembly. And so for an economic vision to be supported, we would need to have a legislative framework of policy that could support it. Shadia, we have to go to the next question, but we can come back to this if we have time, okay? Is it okay?
It's okay.
Okay. So I don't know. I think Yasser wants to ask something to Rabab, and then there's an audience question to Shadia again. And from that, we will move to Mohamed Salah. So Shadia, stay with us because there is a question that came for you from the audience. But first, Yasser.
Yeah, thank you, and really thank you to Rabab to Shadia for this fascinating overview of women's deplorable situation in the countryside. So back to the question of the union. There is a large segment of the population, the poor population, that is outside the formal sector. They are in the black economy, the so-called black economy, between quotation mark. They're not unionized. They're not considered as workers in the proper sense, and many of them are also unemployed. I mean, there is a very large unemployment rates in Sudan right now, and for many years. So, is there an approach or a strategy to work with these people who are not viewed as the conventional workers? And could you talk about that?
Okay. Yes, thank you. It's an important question, and it's definitely the approach is it's a daily process. The development and evolving of an approach to deal with such an important matter is a daily process, and this is mainly because the change in labor market to begin with, in addition to the technological changes within the last 30 years, and the absence of the state as a result of privatization, as a result of the change in the educational system, especially higher education system in Sudan. And generally speaking, in the region and internationally, we do see the increase of the informal sector. And this really opens the door very wide for the Sudanese revolution, generally speaking, because it talks to the core of organizing. It talks to the core of, so the idea behind the union is you have a set of mutual interest and you voluntarily associate to utilize your power of collective bargaining. So as long as there is the condition for exploitation exists, then there is room, like I said, for union organizing or labor organizing. Maybe not union. To begin with, union is a very primitive way of organizing labors, and because it does not speak to the core issue of not owning the means of production to begin with. But if we talk about the informal sector or the dark sector, like you said, the black market, I'm not sure how you call it, but this opens, like I said, the door for the Sudanese revolution in implementing and inventing new ways of organization, specifically linking organization and struggle to local government. Wherever your type of informal job is, in way or another, the state collects some sort of a tax or some sort of some sort of an obstacle in your way of providing a wage that can provide decent life for your informal sector. So linking organization to local government, and generally speaking, building associations, building organization with enough flexibility, and at the same time with that is not going to be alienated from the General Assembly. So I see the way for this as through, again, answering that theoretical question of the relationship between labor organizing and politics. And this question is not necessarily a special case in Sudan. It's worldwide. This question has speak to the what is the political struggle, right? And where does the political struggle gain its power? For example, someone might argue that the political struggle will gain its power from addressing the day-to-day life, right? So the day-to-day life, this includes the informal sector. So if we're able to bring the informal sector in a direct struggle with local government, this way we're going to be able to build bridges between informal sector and actually among other revolutionary bodies, for example, resistance committee. I'm sure there is a lot of in common if you organize based on your labor or based on your geographic area. So the idea is we need to invent and the Sudanese people have been tasked with inventing new way of organizing, and not only for the better interest of the Sudanese people, but for the better interest of the working class in the region, and generally speaking. I just want to make one more point, and I think it's important. We do talk about the informal sector, but we forget that even within the formal sector, unionizing, organizing is very much non-existing. For example, a very big company that is almost taking over the entire market in Sudan is Dal Company. Dal Company does not allow organizing, does not allow unionizing within its companies, and it has so many factories, so many different branches of businesses, and there is we don't even have a minimum way of protecting wage earners. Workers are being laid off, being let go in Dal, and this has happened consistently for a simple post on Facebook. It has happened multiple times. So it's not really like, yes, we do have a challenge within the informal sector, but we still have a challenge within the formal sector. And this goes back, and I can draw similarities to the idea of white collar versus blue collar. The idea is the working class have been systematically alienated from the political and social struggle in Sudan. For example, even when we talk about the union law, we talk about the non-existing of union law. But why would you build a union law for workers without involving workers in establishing and drawing their law, right? Why would you do this in a superficial way, in a centralized way? Again, we're recreating the crisis of creating one center that is going to decide how the country is going to be managed, how is power and wealth is going to be shared. So I think the strategy to move forward, and this is not specifically for informal sector, but generally speaking for revolutionary powers in Sudan and in the region that try to work toward the three goals of the revolution of peace, freedom, and justice, is we need to build new organizations that will widen the political participation of Sudanese individual and have them speak for themselves and for their best interest.
Okay, thank you very much, Rabab. We now have a question to Shadia from the audience. And the question to Shadia is, what is the Sudanese Communist Party's vision of this question of economic justice, and how are political parties reacting to the collective call on the streets to move away from traditional political parties?
Yeah. This call, to move away from the political parties, succeeded in Egypt. Like they isolate the young people in the revolution from the political parties, and by the end of the day, when the revolution succeeds, the only organized parts of the who can deal with the authority was the army and the Muslim Front in Egypt. So this succeeded, and this is, as Mohamed Salah said, the same politics, the same international intervention in our region, to lead the politics, to serve the foreign affairs, so foreign interests. So these calls in Sudan now repeatedly very highly, because just the strong political parties, or the parties who can really play a great role in change, they are not acceptable from the international community, such as the Communist Party. Is not accepted, and they try to avoid the existence of the Communist Party. So and some other parties who are in with the radical change, This is regarding the call. So they are trying just to divide the street, like to isolate the political parties, to force the Sudanese to accept the military form of rule, the military dictatorship, or the formal democracy, which is led by the army, like in Egypt and some other countries. This is regarding these calls. But what about the political or the economical vision of the Communist Party? The Communist Party from the beginning, like almost 30 years, trying just like to work with the masses and with the political forces in Sudan. Actually, from the 80s of the last century, the Communist Party decided that the Sudan cannot be ruled by one party. It is not working, and it is not the right way, because Sudan is very diverse and there is so many elements like Sufis Muslim in Sudan, which has very great effect. The different nationalities, as I call them in Sudan, like the Nuba in the Nuba Mountains, the Nuba in the north, and the different ethnic groups. So that and the complication of the Sudanese political sense itself. So from the 80s of the last century, the Sudanese Communist Party thinks that the best way to help Sudan to get democracy is the liberal democracy, like the civilian exchange of power according to fair election, and work for this target, like to collect the political forces, the right wing and the no the right wing and the left wing in a very big front, just to confront the al-Bashir regime. And this works until the 2000, when the international community realized that the resistance against al-Bashir is strong, and there is very big strong two parties or two groups, the Communist Party and the SPLA, and they think that they are left, which is not good for them, so that they interfere with the Troika project, just to devise the political forces which stand against al-Bashir regime, and they isolate the SPLA, and by the end of the day, they lead the process until the separation of Sudan, so that who remains in the Sudan, the political forces which are against al-Bashir, and also they are more or less, I can say balanced, because they just like all the time there is a very big resistance against al-Bashir regime. So they work on this again, and they divide it by Sudan call, and which is agreed with negotiation with the regime and with the Troika project, and the parties who are with the radical change, who remains by the side of the Communist Party in one alliance. And after which led the revolution with different bodies like the Association of Workers and the demands bodies and women groups and so on. When the revolution is high in Sudan, and after the 6th of April, just there's again the same interference to divide this strong front, and they succeed. Again, the parties who are agreed with the negotiation of the regime or with the Troika project continued, and we see what happens in the last 2 years of the post the revolution. So, which I want to say that the Communist Party all this time set with other political forces his political vision and economical vision, which is more or less, it is the statement of freedom and change. And you can find the political program of the Communist Party on all the paragraphs of the political and freedom, the freedom and change statement, which was divided by the Sudan call parties, which is with Troika or with soft landing project, and it is very different from the economical project, which was presented by the political forces, which was in the same front with the Communist Party. So the Communist Party has the document of the democratic alternative, which is contained, it is the political vision and the economical vision. And after that, they post a new document, which is just like have the solution from the vision of the Communist Party, the political and the economical. And the main ideas of this political, this economical vision is getting back all the assets of the previous regime to the finance ministry, and to be under the control of the state, and to make main reforms in the agriculture sectors, which was like in a specific way, which can serve the economical reform, and also about the water sector and the dams, and about the supporting of the daily life, or the daily life economical needs of the people. So, like the Communist Party have the vision, but its vision, it is very different from the policies which was being applied by the government during the 2 years, and now it is completely against the will of the government post the coup, and it is not accepted at all. But which is good. The Communist Party is working very closely with the resisting communities, with the demanding bodies. You can find the Communist Party like in the same line with the revolutionary force in Sudan. I don't know if I did answer or not.
Shukran. Thank you to excellent response. I think we have one last question. Very inspiring panel with 3 inspiring speakers, and this question is about the most effective kind of support the diaspora in Europe and the Zaki is in the UK can give to the Popular Resistance Committee and collective demand groups. And I would like to ask this question to Mohamed Salah, who is on the ground in Sudan. أستاذ محمد صلاح، السؤال حول ما هي أفضل السبل لدعم الثورة السودانية ودعم لجان المقاومة الشعبية بالنسبة للأشخاص اللي مقيمين بالغرب بأوروبا والخارج.
شكرا على السؤال، وشكرا على يعني الأستاذة رباب والأستاذة شادية. على المساهمات النوعيه الجميله وانا استفدت منها كثير. بخصوص السؤال، حقيقه في دور كبير جدا بيقوموا به يعني على مر السنين السابقه، اذا كانوا سودانيين او غير سودانيين، في تضامن مع الشعب السوداني في ثورته. استمرار الدور ده بالتنظيم وتوحيد اشكال المقاومه هو مهم. الجزء الثاني هو انه المعركه طويله جدا ضد الانقلابيين في السودان، واللي هو القوة المعادية للتقدم في السودان. المعركة ما هي بس سقوط الوجه ده للانقلاب، لأنه سقوطه وشيك، لكن حيكون في محاولات لإعادة إنتاج النظام بأشكال ثانية. فالأشكال بتاعت المقاومة محتاجة إنها تكون أكثر جذرية، محتاجة إنها ترتبط بالمقاومة في الداخل، محتاجة إنها تحاصر الأنشطة الاقتصادية للمؤسسات الدولية الشغالة في السودان، زي الشركات الكندية شغالة في التعدين، الشركات غير الشغالة في البترول، المستثمرين شغالين في نزع الأراضي. ربط النشاط ده يعني بكل الرؤية العالمية للتقدم هو مسألة مهمة. الثورة السودانية هي ما حاجة معزولة عن الثورات والمقاومة في كل العالم، وقضاياها هي جزء من القضايا المطروحة في كل العالم. الربط اللي بيحصل في السودان باللي بيحصل في الإقليم، اللي بيحصل في السودان مرتبط باللي بيحصل في إثيوبيا، باللي بيحصل في إريتريا، باللي بيحصل في التدخل المصري في السودان، بالميليشيات العابرة للحدود في الساحل اللي هو فيه تشاد، النيجر، ليبيا، أفريقيا الوسطى، مالي. وهي محاولة لتحويل المنطقة كلها لمنطقة بتاعت ميليشيات. فبناء التحالفات على الأساس ده هو بيضمن استمرار المقاومة، لأنه هي ما بس مقاومة ضد الانقلاب. وبناء التحالفات وبناء المقاومة على أساس رفض السياسات للمشروع الانقلابي، وبناء التحالفات على الأساس ده هو بيوسع المقاومة وبيخليها عندها يعني أكثر فعالية.
Okay. So to the question, Mohamed Salah first said that he wants to thank everybody and thank Shadia and Rabab for their interventions, which he benefited from a lot. He said, of course, there is a very big role that is being played in terms of solidarity, not just by the Sudanese, but also by the non-Sudanese outside Sudan. And that this role, that the continuation of the forms of resistance have to understand one thing, which is that this is a very long struggle. At the moment, we're struggling against the coup makers, but this long struggle is actually a struggle against the counter-revolution and the forces that are working to subvert the demands of people in Sudan and within the region. The face that we see now of the military coup makers, this will fall soon. However, the struggle will continue. So one of the things that people should continue to do is to keep building the resistance, for example, abroad, to actually resist and fight and expose the economic activities of Western and foreign, not just Western, but foreign companies that are benefiting in many, many different ways from the exploitation of the Sudanese people, whether it is through land grabbing, through mining, through many different activities. For example, the Canadian companies that are doing this. And to tie this kind of activity so that we are able to what's happening in the region as a whole, what is happening in neighboring countries, what is happening in Eritrea, in Ethiopia, and also in the Sahel region, right, with Chad, Niger, Libya, that there is basically an attempt to turn this region into a region, to militarize it and turn it into a region of militias. So this requires a kind of global solidarity that builds on a long struggle of resistance that is able then to actively and effectively build solidarity and resist this long-term counter-revolution and the attempt to militarize the region. Thank you very much for this answer. It's a really wonderful way actually to end the questions. We're coming to a close. You see on the screen now, this is actually the cover of the book that Mohamed Salah published a few years ago, and it's called The Price of Gold. It's called سعر الذهب التكلفة البيئية والاجتماعية للتعدين, which means the price of gold, the environmental and social price of mining. So basically, this is a book that looks much more in depth at this question of mining and the communities that are actually affected by mining and the environmental effect of it as well. This book can be ordered in line for those who read in Arabic, and of course, if there's an interest to translate it, we would be happy to put you in touch with Mohamed Salah. We will also post an article that Shadi Abdelmunem recently wrote for Open Democracy that we've mentioned about the role of women in the resistance. We will post that in the comments. And I would just like to take the last couple of minutes to also show you this poster, which Mohamed Salah shared with me a few days ago. There is always this question when we speak about the Sudanese revolution of the rural areas. What is happening in the rural areas? They're of course much less connected by internet. They are much more. They do not have as large of a voice even within Sudan in terms of reflecting the revolution. So the organization that Mohamed is a part of, this gathering of demand-based organizations or bodies, is actually mobilizing. Is one of the many activities that it does. It's mobilizing caravans, protest caravans on the 13th of December, so on Monday. And it's a really beautiful poster. So it says, I just want to translate it for the audience. It says, it has the date, it has the name of the gathering or the alliance. And it says, remember that the first lesson, the boy is a boy of this country. The girl is a girl of this country. This country is the country of the boy and the girl. And it says at the bottom, from your place, wherever you are, support the caravans with a stand. Raise slogans or have a caravan yourself. It doesn't matter if you are many or few. The most important thing is to send a message of love to the revolutionaries. So thank you very much to our three speakers. I think Shadia wants to say something very quickly. Go ahead, Shadia.
Yeah, just I wanted to say that like the Sudanese revolution really needs the international support from the people who just believe in the Sudanese liberation. And I think that the international community, like led by USA, is dealing with the Sudanese revolution and the Sudanese political forces from the point of view of the Cold War, so that they think that like the Communist Party is something which is going tomorrow make the communism and threat their interest in Sudan. I just wanted to say that like the Sudanese revolution, including the Communist Party, including women, want quality and free education, quality and free healthcare, quality and life, which like meets the dignity of human beings. And this is which applied in all over the West countries. And it is not very much for us like to just get the dignity life. So they have just to think about to read the documents of the revolution, which is written like by all the Sudanese or majority of Sudanese political forces, including the Communist Party. And they also invited to read the program of the Communist Party and to find out that we are fighting for freedom and justice. Like, guess we are not fighting against USA or against, we have our interests also. If they have their interest in Sudan, we have our interests also. So we want like just like to deal on the basement of of humanity. And they cannot like just oppress the Sudanese people because they don't want the Communist Party. This is not unfair and it is not moral. I think that like the people who can want to make solidarity with the Sudanese, just they can argue with these points. Like we are fighting for dignity, we are fighting for freedom and justice. Like we are not fighting them. So that why they are fighting us.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you,
Shadia. I think Rabab, I always appreciate you, and I think it's very clear that there is an amazing and incredible need, because this revolution, actually what happened in Sudan has ramifications for the whole region at the very least. And I think I don't think I'm biased to say that it is one of the most at the moment one of the brightest spots of hope, I think, for leftists worldwide. Rabab wanted to say something very, very quickly. Thank you very much, Rabab. Please go ahead.
Sure. So I want to thank the organizers. I want to thank Sada Shadia, and I want to thank Mohamed Salah as well. And the just final thought, there is no alternative but the victory of the Sudanese revolution. I say this knowing that we do work in stages and we do learn from our mistakes. But something that I would like to highlight is the fact that the Sudanese revolution has literally opened the door wide open to rethink the concept of democracy in the country, in the region, and internationally. We need to activate mass/popular democracy. We need to rethink that. We need to put the class struggle within the center of practicing democracy, practicing politics. And we need to remember that political struggle actually gains its power when it's linked to the daily life of the people. And with that, I leave you with freedom, peace, and justice. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you also to our three speakers. Shukran kathir, ya Muhammad, ya Shadia, ya Rabab. We are so honored to have you speak today. I want to thank behind the scenes, Sina Sakafat, who has been doing an amazing job of doing all the technical work for this. Again, we want to thank our co-sponsors, Internationalism from Below, Tempest Magazine, Sudan Uprising Germany, and the Global Prison Abolitionist Coalition. All of these organizations, as well as the Alliance of MENA Socialists, have Facebook pages and other social media. You can link to those pages on the event. You can go to their pages. Please follow them. They all do very great work. And yes, this video will be available online, and please share it widely. And thank you again to everyone.
Thank you, Sarah.